The morning mist clung to the Oklahoma plains like a shroud, and Eleanor Matthews stood at her kitchen window, watching the sun struggle to break through the gray sky. 3 months had passed since the telegram arrived. "We regret to inform you." But the words still echoed in her mind like gunshots. Her husband Thomas would never see their dream of a thriving ranch come true. The fence line stretched before her, broken and sagging like her own spirit. Cattle had wandered through the gaps again last night, and she didn't have the strength to chase them back. Her calloused hands, once soft and ladylike back in Boston, trembled as she poured her morning coffee. The bank notice lay crumpled on the table. 2 months behind on payments. Final warning. "I can't do this anymore, Thomas," she whispered to the empty kitchen. "I just can't." As if summoned by her desperation, a figure emerged from the morning haze. Eleanor's heart stopped. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, with long black hair tied back, was working on her fence. His movements were precise, methodical, as he pulled the broken posts from the ground and began setting new ones. She grabbed Thomas's rifle from above the fireplace, her hands shaking. Apache raids weren't unheard of in this part of Oklahoma territory, though they'd become rare. The stories from her neighbors always ended the same way, but this man wasn't raiding. He was building. Eleanor stepped onto her porch, the rifle heavy in her arms. "What are you doing on my land?" The man didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her words at all. He simply continued his work, his bronzed hands moving with practiced efficiency as he aligned a new fence post. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, revealing old scars that spoke of battles fought and survived. "I asked you a question," Eleanor's voice cracked, betraying her fear. Still nothing. The man reached for his hammer and drove the post deeper into the earth with powerful, measured strikes. Each blow echoed across the plains like thunder. Eleanor noticed something then that made her lower the rifle slightly. This wasn't destruction, it was repair. The fence line he was working on was stronger than it had ever been, the posts set deeper, the wire pulled tighter. She watched for 20 minutes, fascination slowly replacing fear. He worked without water, without rest, as if the fence was the most important thing in the world. When he finished one section, he moved to the next, gathering materials from a pile she hadn't noticed before. Good lumber, strong wire, proper tools. "Where did you get those supplies?" she called out. Again, silence. But this time, the man paused in his work and looked at her directly. His eyes were deep brown, weathered by sun and time, and held a sadness that matched her own. There was no threat in his gaze, no malice, just understanding. Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking further, but shifting, like ice beginning to thaw. As the sun climbed higher, the man completed an entire section of fence that would have taken Eleanor and Thomas a full day to finish. When he was done, he gathered his tools and walked away, disappearing into the grassland as silently as he had come. That evening, Eleanor walked the fence line he had repaired. It was perfect, strong enough to hold her cattle, built to last through Oklahoma's harsh weather. She ran her fingers along the wire, trying to make sense of what had happened. On the ground near the last post, she found something that made her breath catch. A small piece of turquoise, polished smooth, left deliberately where she would find it. She closed her fingers around the stone and looked toward the horizon, where the mysterious man had vanished. For the first time since Thomas's death, Eleanor felt something other than despair. She felt curious. The next morning, Eleanor woke before dawn. She dressed quickly and positioned herself at the kitchen window, coffee cup in hand, waiting. Sure enough, as the first light touched the plains, the figure appeared again. Today he worked on the east fence line, the section most damaged by last winter's storms. Eleanor grabbed a second cup of coffee and walked outside, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I brought you coffee," she said, setting the cup on a fence post within his reach. The man glanced at the steaming cup, but didn't stop working. Eleanor sat on her porch steps, close enough to watch, but far enough to feel safe. She studied his profile: high cheekbones, a strong jaw marked by a thin scar, hands that moved with the confidence of someone who had built many things in his life. "My husband died in the war," she said suddenly, surprising herself. "He was supposed to come back and help me run this place. We were going to raise cattle, maybe horses." Her voice grew smaller. "I don't know why I'm telling you this. You probably don't even understand English." The man's hands stilled on the wire he was stretching. He looked at her with those deep, knowing eyes, and Eleanor saw something there that made her throat tight. He understood. Maybe not her words, but certainly her pain. "The bank wants to take the ranch," she continued, finding it easier to talk to someone who wouldn't judge or offer empty consolations. "I owe $300, and I don't know where I'm going to get it. Thomas had big dreams, but dreams don't pay debts." The Apache man reached for the coffee cup and took a slow sip. It was the first acknowledgement he'd made of her presence, and Eleanor felt an unexpected flutter of victory. They worked in silence then, he on the fence, she weeding the vegetable garden that had been neglected since Thomas left. The quiet between them felt different from the oppressive silence of grief she'd grown accustomed to. This was peaceful, shared, like two people who understood that sometimes words weren't necessary. Around midday, the man stopped working and walked to the tree line. Eleanor thought he was leaving, but he returned with an armload of wild berries, which he placed in a neat pile on the porch railing before returning to his work. Eleanor stared at the berries, sweet June berries that grew in the creek bottoms. She hadn't noticed them before, too consumed by her own troubles to see the abundance around her. She tasted one. It was perfect, ripe and sweet. "Thank you," she said. The man nodded once, a small gesture that spoke volumes. As evening approached and he prepared to leave, Eleanor found her courage. "Will you come back tomorrow?" The man paused, his tools in hand. He looked at the half-finished fence, then at Eleanor's hopeful face. He pointed to himself, then to the fence, then held up 3 fingers. 3 more days of work. Eleanor nodded, understanding. That night, she made berry preserves with his gift, the sweet smell filling her lonely house. For the first time in months, she planned beyond the next day. If he would keep fixing her ranch, maybe she could find a way to keep it. The turquoise stone sat on her bedside table, catching the lamplight like a promise. By the 4th day, Eleanor had established a routine. She would wake early, prepare 2 cups of coffee, and meet her silent helper at whatever section of fence he had chosen to repair. Today, she also brought biscuits wrapped in a clean cloth. The Apache man accepted the food with a slight nod that Eleanor had learned was his way of saying thank you. She found herself looking forward to these small acknowledgements, these tiny bridges built between their very different worlds. "The people in town think you're dangerous," Eleanor said as she handed him a biscuit still warm from the oven. "Mrs. Henderson from the general store warned me about Indian troubles." But you're not troublesome at all, are you?" The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Eleanor realized she might have touched on something painful, the assumptions, the fear, the way people like Mrs. Henderson saw him. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "People are afraid of what they don't understand. I was too at first." He looked at her then, really looked, and Eleanor saw a flicker of surprise in his dark eyes. It occurred to her that perhaps no one had ever apologized to him for their prejudice before. They worked through the morning, Eleanor pulling weeds from her neglected garden while he reinforced the corner posts that anchored the entire fence system. The work was demanding. Each post had to be set precisely, braced properly, secured with wire that wouldn't give under pressure from cattle or weather. Around noon, a wagon appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust as it approached. Eleanor's stomach dropped as she recognized Sheriff Morrison's distinctive black hat. "Hide!" she whispered urgently to the Apache man. "Go to the creek." But he didn't move. Instead, he set down his tools and stood straight, facing the approaching wagon with quiet dignity. Eleanor realized he had probably faced this kind of confrontation before and had decided long ago not to run. Sheriff Morrison pulled up near the house, his deputy beside him, both men's hands resting casually on their gun belts. "Morning, Mrs. Matthews. We've had reports of an Indian on your property." "Reports from whom?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew. "Concerned neighbors. Mrs. Henderson saw him from the road." Morrison's eyes found the Apache man. "You there? You understand English?" The man said nothing, but his eyes never left the sheriff's face. "I asked you a question, boy." "Don't call him that," Eleanor said sharply, surprising everyone, including herself. "He's a man, and he's been helping me repair my fence." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Helping? Ma'am, with respect, Indians don't just help folks out of the goodness of their hearts. What's he really after?" Eleanor looked at the completed sections of fence, stronger than they'd ever been, then at the man who had asked for nothing in return. "Maybe he's just a good person, Sheriff. Maybe that's enough." "Mrs. Matthews, your husband died fighting Indians. Surely you can't—" "My husband died fighting in Cuba," Eleanor interrupted. "And this man has done more to help me keep this ranch in 4 days than anyone else has done in 4 months. The sheriff studied the fence line, clearly impressed despite himself. "Well, I suppose if he's got permission to be here—" He turned to the Apache man. "But understand, any trouble, and you'll answer for it." The man nodded once, the same small gesture Eleanor had come to recognize. After the sheriff left, Eleanor and her helper worked in a different kind of quiet, one charged with unspoken understanding. She had stood up for him, and he had stayed to face the confrontation rather than bringing trouble to her door. As evening approached, the man gathered his tools as usual, but instead of simply walking away, he approached Eleanor. From his pocket, he withdrew a piece of paper, rough, handmade, with symbols drawn in charcoal. Eleanor studied the marks, recognizing some as numbers, others as simple pictures. A house, a fence, a woman, a man working, and at the bottom, a drawing of the sun rising repeated 7 times. "1 week?" Eleanor asked. "You'll stay 1 more week?" The man pointed to the unfinished fence sections, then to Eleanor, then tapped the paper where he'd drawn the number that looked like 300. Eleanor's heart stopped. He knew about her debt. Somehow he understood that she needed to make this ranch profitable or lose it forever. "Yes," she whispered, "I need to save $300. The man nodded, folded the paper, and handed it to her. Then he did something he had never done before. He placed his hand over his heart and looked directly into her eyes. Eleanor felt tears she hadn't expected. This stranger, this man her neighbors feared, had made her a promise. He would help her save her home. For the first time since Thomas died, Eleanor believed she might actually succeed. The final week brought an urgency to their work that Eleanor had never experienced. Her Apache helper, she had begun thinking of him as Joseph, though she had no idea if that was anywhere close to his real name, seemed to understand that time was running short. He worked longer hours, arriving before dawn and staying past sunset. Eleanor matched his dedication, throwing herself into preparing the ranch for a cattle sale that could save or doom her. She mended harnesses, organized the barn, and practiced herding the cattle into the holding pen. Joseph watched her struggle with the stubborn animals and began helping with that too, moving among the cattle with a natural ease that spoke of experience with livestock. On Wednesday, he appeared with 2 horses, a pinto mare, and a solid bay gelding. Eleanor stared in amazement as he led them into her corral. "Where did you—" She stopped herself. She was learning that Joseph's methods weren't always conventional, but they were always honest. "Are they yours?" Joseph nodded and gestured toward the cattle, then mimed riding. Eleanor understood. He was lending her horses so she could move her herd more effectively. That afternoon, she rode the gentle mare while Joseph took the gelding, and together they brought her scattered cattle into a tight, manageable group. Eleanor felt a joy she hadn't experienced in months, the simple pleasure of accomplishing something difficult alongside another person. "Thomas would have loved this," she said, as they watched the cattle settle in the corral. "He always said ranching was about partnership, with the land, with the animals, with each other." Joseph looked at her with those understanding eyes, and Eleanor realized that's exactly what they had built, a partnership born of necessity but grown into something deeper. On Friday, 2 days before the bank deadline, cattle buyer Jim Crawford arrived from Tulsa. Eleanor's hands shook as she showed him the herd, praying her 43 head of cattle would be worth enough to save the ranch. Crawford walked among the animals, checking their condition, estimating weights. Eleanor held her breath as he made notes in his ledger book. "They're in good shape, Mrs. Matthews, better than I expected for someone working alone." Crawford glanced toward the house where Joseph stood in the shadows of the porch. "That your hired man? He's a friend who's been helping?" Crawford nodded slowly, his weathered hands clasping behind his back as he surveyed the cattle one final time. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the corral, and Eleanor could hear her heart beating in the sudden silence that stretched between them like a taut rope. "Good friend to have," Crawford said finally, his voice carrying the weight of years spent evaluating livestock and the people who raised them. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's despite his advancing age, lingered on the fence posts that stood straight and true, testament to Joseph's meticulous craftsmanship. "I can offer you $280 for the lot." Eleanor's heart sank like a stone dropped into a deep well. $20 short. So tantalizingly close she could almost taste the relief, but not enough to save her beloved ranch. The number echoed in her mind, mocking her desperate hopes. She felt the familiar sting of tears threatening behind her eyes, but she held them back with the same fierce determination that had kept her going through months of uncertainty. "However," Crawford continued, his tone shifting slightly as he turned his full attention to Eleanor, "I notice your fence work is exceptional. Professional quality, better than most operations I've seen in 30 years of cattle buying." His gnarled finger pointed toward the sturdy posts and precisely strung wire that enclosed the corral. "The animals are well cared for, properly fed, and clearly handled by someone who knows what they're doing. If you can guarantee me delivery of cattle this good every 6 months, I'd be willing to pay a premium for that kind of reliability. $320 for this herd, and we'll set up a regular contract that could benefit us both for years to come." Eleanor nearly collapsed with relief, her knees threatening to buckle beneath her as the words sank in. The crushing weight that had pressed on her chest for months suddenly lifted, replaced by a surge of gratitude so overwhelming it threatened to steal her breath entirely. "Yes," she managed to whisper, then found her voice growing stronger with each word. "Yes, absolutely. You have my word, Mr. Crawford. Every 6 months, cattle just as good as these." Dome. As Crawford methodically counted out the money, his calloused fingers separating each bill with the precision of a man who had handled countless such transactions, Eleanor found herself looking toward Joseph, who had witnessed the entire negotiation from his position near the barn. Throughout the tense exchange, he had remained perfectly still, yet somehow his presence had been a source of strength she hadn't fully appreciated until this moment. When their eyes met across the dusty yard, he offered her a smile. The first time she had seen him truly smile in all the weeks they had worked together. The expression completely transformed his weathered, sun-darkened face, revealing the warmth and kindness of the man she had come to know, trust, and depend upon in ways she was only beginning to understand. That evening, as the Oklahoma sky painted itself in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Eleanor sat on her porch with the precious money safely locked away in Thomas's heavy iron strongbox. The weight of financial security felt strange after so many months of uncertainty, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit but were infinitely more comfortable than what she'd had before. Joseph joined her without invitation, settling on the weathered wooden steps with the easy comfort of someone whose friendship had been earned through shared hardship and mutual respect. The evening air carried the scent of prairie grass and the distant sound of cattle settling for the night. "I don't know how to thank you," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion as she struggled to find words adequate for what Joseph had done for her. "You saved my home. You saved my life. Everything I have, everything I am now, I owe to your kindness and skill." Joseph reached into his worn cotton shirt and withdrew a leather cord, darkened with age and handling, strung with carefully chosen beads and small pieces of turquoise that caught the last light of the setting sun. Each bead seemed to tell a story, polished smooth by years of wear and imbued with significance Eleanor could only guess at. He held the necklace out to her with both hands, his gesture formal and reverent. "I can't accept this," Eleanor protested, recognizing instinctively that the necklace held deep meaning. "It looks important, like something that belongs to your family, your people." Joseph placed the necklace gently in her palm, his calloused fingers briefly touching hers as he closed her fingers around the precious gift. The turquoise felt warm against her skin, smooth and somehow alive with the energy of the hands that had crafted it. Then he pointed deliberately to her, to himself, and finally swept his arm in a wide arc encompassing the ranch around them. The barn, the corrals, the rolling pasture land that stretched to the horizon. Eleanor understood with a clarity that needed no words. The necklace was a symbol of the profound bond they had formed, the partnership that had not only saved her ranch but had possibly secured both their futures in ways neither could have imagined. "Will you stay?" Eleanor asked, the question carrying more weight than she had intended. "I mean permanently. I could pay you proper wages now, and there's plenty of work to keep us both busy for years to come. We could build something real together." Joseph considered her words carefully, his dark eyes studying the horizon as if reading messages written in the evening sky. Then he pointed toward a distant ridge where a small group of riders was approaching, their silhouettes dark against the fading light. Eleanor felt her muscles tense instinctively, but Joseph remained perfectly calm, his posture relaxed and expectant rather than defensive. The riders were Apache, 3 men and an older woman whose bearing spoke of authority and wisdom earned through decades of leadership. They stopped at a respectful distance from the house, their horses shifting restlessly beneath them as the woman called out in their own musical language, her voice carrying across the evening air with the weight of family concern and cultural tradition. Joseph replied immediately, his voice warm but firm, speaking words that flowed like water over stones, beautiful in their cadence, even though Eleanor couldn't understand their meaning. Eleanor realized, with a mixture of sadness and understanding, that this was his family, or at least his people, come to find him after his long absence. The conversation continued for several minutes, punctuated by gestures toward Eleanor and the ranch, animated discussion that spoke of decisions being weighed and futures being considered. Finally, the older woman nodded gravely and spoke again, her words seeming to pose a question that hung in the air like smoke. Joseph turned to Eleanor, and when he spoke it was in English, the first English word she had ever heard him speak aloud. His voice was deeper than she had expected, gentle but strong, carrying an accent that spoke of a language learned later in life, but mastered with care. "Family," he said simply. "They want you to come home," Eleanor said, her heart breaking even as she understood the pull of blood and tradition. "Choice," Joseph said, the word careful but clear, each syllable pronounced with deliberate precision. Eleanor felt her heart breaking and healing simultaneously, torn between her desperate need for his partnership and her recognition of what he was giving up. He was choosing to stay with her, but the cost was separation from his people, from the culture and family that had shaped him. The weight of that sacrifice pressed heavily on her conscience. "No," she said firmly, standing up with sudden decision. "Family is important. You shouldn't have to choose between your people and this place." She looked at the older woman, whose weathered face spoke of years of hard decisions and difficult wisdom, then back at Joseph. "What if there was another way? What if we could find a solution that honors both?" Eleanor stood and walked slowly toward the Apache woman, her hands open and empty at her sides to show peaceful intentions, her heart racing with the boldness of what she was about to propose. She spoke slowly and clearly, hoping Joseph would translate every word, every nuance of her meaning. "Tell her," Eleanor began, her voice steady despite her nervousness, "that I would be honored to have all of you as neighbors. There's good land by the creek, with plenty of fresh water running year-round, room for horses and families to grow and prosper." She gestured toward the wide plains that stretched endlessly in every direction, rich grassland that could support far more than her small herd of cattle. "Tell her I don't need workers or hired hands. I need partners, people who understand this land in their bones, who know how to work with it instead of against it." Joseph's eyes widened with surprise, and something that might have been hope as he began to translate, his voice taking on new animation as he conveyed Eleanor's unprecedented offer. The ensuing conversation was longer and more animated, with all the riders participating, their voices rising and falling in what seemed to be intense debate. Gestures flew between them, pointing toward the ranch, the creek, the horizon, and back to Eleanor herself. Finally, the older woman rode closer, her horse's hooves raising small clouds of dust as she approached to study Eleanor, with eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "She wants to know," Joseph said, his voice carrying the weight of generations of mistrust and conflict. "Why you trust Apache when others fear us, when the newspapers speak of us as enemies, when the government tries to force us onto reservations far from our ancestral lands." Eleanor looked directly at the woman, meeting her penetrating gaze without flinching, drawing on every ounce of courage and conviction she possessed. "Tell her," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "that I've learned something important these past months. The heart knows things the mind doesn't, things that can't be taught or explained, only felt. My heart tells me you're good people, people of honor and wisdom. My heart tells me that together we can build something good and lasting, something that benefits everyone." Joseph translated with obvious care, his voice carrying the full weight of Eleanor's sincerity. The woman listened intently, her stern expression gradually softening as the words sank in. When Eleanor finished speaking, the woman was quiet for a long moment, studying her with new interest. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried a different tone, warmer and more considering. "She says," Joseph translated, and Eleanor could hear the smile in his voice even before she saw it on his face, "that you have wisdom unusual for someone so young and courage that speaks well of your character. She will consider your offer seriously and discuss it with the other families. Such decisions cannot be made quickly, but your words carry weight." As the sun set over the Oklahoma plains, Eleanor watched Apache riders disappear into the dusk, their figures blending with the land they knew so well. Beside her stood Joseph, not just the quiet man who had once appeared unexpectedly, but now a trusted friend and constant companion. When Eleanor asked what he would do if the Apache leaders rejected her offer, Joseph simply replied, "Stay. This is home now," affirming his deep connection to both her and the ranch they had rebuilt together. Eleanor felt peace for the first time since losing her husband to war. The ranch was no longer just surviving, it was secure. And for the first time, she no longer carried its burdens alone. Though the future held unknowns, it also held promise, partnership, and new beginnings. 3 months later, the transformation was complete. The Apache families accepted Eleanor's offer and established a thriving community by the creek, turning the once isolated ranch into a vibrant hub of life. Children's laughter, the sound of animals, and the rhythms of daily work filled the air. Joseph, whose full name Eleanor now knew to be Joseph Running Bear, had become her true partner. While Eleanor managed contracts and buyers, Joseph brought his expertise in horsemanship and cattle to the growing operation. Together, they turned a struggling ranch into a prosperous enterprise. But greater than the material success was the sense of family and belonging that emerged from mutual trust and respect. Eleanor had not only saved her land, she had built a new life filled with meaning. As she touched the turquoise necklace at her throat, she reflected on how love and healing often arrive silently, in the form of strangers who become everything we need. Watching the sunset over the land that was now truly home, she smiled, knowing she hadn't just endured, but flourished.